In this video, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of scheduling volunteers at your church. We'll talk about Wes and his journey as a worship leader at a church plant and all the mistakes that he made, as well as lessons that I've learned talking to church leaders all over the world. Let's get into it. So Wes, apparently your volunteers hated you.
Hate is a strong word.
It is a strong word.
Let's just say that I did a lot of things wrong as a worship leader in scheduling my people that caused them to be irked towards me.
I am proud of you for being humble enough to admit this, especially on camera. All right, so we're going to talk about the do's and the don'ts of volunteer scheduling and hopefully how to avoid burnout at your church.
Yeah.
Using you as an example of what not to do.
But we have more. I have actually found a formula, this formula of the perfect amount of time you schedule out your volunteers.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the ultimate formula.
Well, let's talk about it. So I actually wrote recently an article, the do's and don'ts of church volunteer scheduling, and in it, I covered several don'ts, and I kind of feel like we need to just rip the Band-Aid off and talk about the don'ts first. You know, deal the bad news out before giving the good news. So the don'ts. Let's cover the don'ts today.
Oh, man. All right, so you go through them, and the first one you said is don't assume availability. I feel like you're in my brain and just looking at all the things I did wrong.
Well, see, I talk to a lot of church leaders. I just talked to a lot of church leaders here at ChurchTrac.
Yeah.
And I gleaned a lot of wisdom from just chatting with them, listening to some that do it very well and others that have struggled and have had to learn some lessons the hard way.
Yeah.
And assuming availability is something that a lot of church leaders run into, where they have a group of volunteers that are very faithful, they're very devoted, they're very energized,
Yep.
and they say yes to everything. So eventually you form a habit of just assuming they always tell you yes.
Yes.
So you assume that this week they're available. They're gonna say yes.
Yeah.
And so you just schedule them without even checking in, because why bother? They're gonna tell you yes anyway.
Well, especially in this day and age where, you know, if you're not using some sort of volunteer scheduling program, by the way, you totally should be, because now people can like set out block out dates and stuff before I send them requests.
Right.
That's something our software does and a lot of other tools out there. But this is a problem that I had from starting a church plant and growing a team to other bigger churches that have established teams, but it's still the same problem, because if you have a small church, you're having to use these people a lot because you're trying to build up your team and everything, and then hopefully you can filter people in, have a schedule of different people. But you also have the same problem in a bigger ministry, for whether it's child check-in, or maybe it is like your team that's doing your hospitality or your worship team, where your team leaders that are scheduling people get used to having those same people.
Yes.
And get used to just assuming they're going to be there. And then I feel like it snowballs. And you just constantly get in this rut where you keep using the same people over and over again, even though there could be other people that are available that would want to serve that you're not using.
Well, it's also finding that path of least resistance. We all do it.
Yeah.
It's harder to do the work of like recruiting other people to join the team so that you can rotate people in and out than it is to just go with what works, which is here's the group of people that are always there, ready and willing to help and serve.
Yeah. Now, point number 2, avoid last minute changes. So I was so guilty of this.
Really?
At least in the beginning. You know, and this also comes down to like your church and your style of worship, because some churches, they go into worship where they have like a very loose game plan of how they want their worship to be, and then other churches have very regimented, and somewhere in between. But having these last minute changes can just mess things up so bad. And I did this so many times with my scheduling, where I would have my whole team set for that Sunday, and then like on a Friday night, I would just have an aha where I'm like, man, I really want to do this particular song because I was talking to the pastor about what we want to accomplish here in this part, and this person just does this song so much better, and I'm going to switch up my vocalist and have this vocalist. Like, I would do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Why? I do not know.
On the fly?
Yeah. And even in the service itself, I would drive people nuts because I'd feel the Spirit led to do How He Loves because the pastor just said it after we're coming up and the pastor is just talking about how He loves us. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
I have to sing that song.
We have to do this song. and this was unplanned and the team has no idea what key I'm about to do this in and everything. And I just start going, the bass player's like, I think he's in G. I don't know.
And the piano player's like, I'm going to wait till the bridge to come in.
That definitely, that would drive my people nuts sometimes when I would do that because they would come in, a lot of them very practiced and ready, only to find that all their practice and everything meant nothing because I just pulled out a song out of the hat. So
see, that's why they were frustrated right there.
Yes.
But also, overlooking feedback is an issue that I see a lot of leaders, at least in the early days when they're trying to figure this out and they're learning how to lead a team. They'll sort of bootstrap a system that works maybe at least for a season.
Yeah.
But as new volunteers join the team dynamic changes.
Yes.
But the process and the approach and the methods of the leader don't. And so they overlook any feedback that's coming in from at least the new one saying, hey, can I do this? I need that. They just, well, it's worked this way all this time. So you just kind of need to get on board.
Yeah. Well, and so just to bring you into where I started and where I ended up at, so it was just me playing acoustic guitar. And I eventually got someone that was able to run our sound because before I had someone running our sound, it was literally we just turned on the soundboard, set the settings, and then we rolled.
Hope that nothing messed up.
Pray that there's no feedback or anything, and then eventually had a guy run sound. And then one of my buddies actually came on board to play the cajon. And for those of you who don't know what a cajon is, it's the box that you hit, and it's got the kick sound and the snare. Incredible worship sounds, by the way, from a cajon. I've seen bands that don't have a drum set that have a cajon, and it sounds nuts.
Me too.
But that's besides the point. But so we gradually grew. So like in that first 6 months, we tripled the size of our team because we went from just me to then a guy running sound to cajon. But then over the course of another year, I would just constantly, anybody I talked to, I'd be like, hey, do you play? Do you sing? And people would tell me yes or no. And then I would just like bring them into the worship team super fast. And then I got to this point where I had a team where I had like 2 electric guitarists on a Sunday, a bass player, a drummer, a keyboard player, a violin player.
Oh my goodness!
I'm talking
at a church plant,
dude. At a church plant, I'm talking like by our peak before I left. I mean, we had like 150 people, and I had a band that was bigger than most bands of established churches, 4 times the size of our church.
Absolutely.
And I had a big bench behind it because I had other people that weren't even on that week. Which is crazy. I still don't know how God like just brought that in and brought every amazing vocalist and musician in our city to our church plant, but it happened. But as we grew, this coming back to this point you made, is that I was still trying to lead worship and schedule people and do all that just how I was when I was by myself.
Yeah.
And so I was giving zero direction to my electric guitarist. I was giving zero direction to my person that was playing the violin, my person that was playing the keys and the piano. And it just made it very hard for my people to really just know what to do.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's a good point. Like, you have to be a certain way when you get started or when you first come on board in a team and you're kind of building, but as you grow a team, you have to change how you approach things, and you have to really listen to your people.
Yeah,
and that's something I didn't do well, man.
So, and that's that. The problem with that is it's one of the prime factors that leads to like burnout or overloading your volunteers, is constantly scheduling people over and over again instead of rotating them in and out, which you were able to do when everything was running smoothly, when you had a whole team with you. But in the early days, it was just you and the guy on the cajon and the guy at the board every week.
Yeah.
Every single week.
Yeah.
And that gets exhausting for a lot of volunteers. And especially if you're like in your situation, a church plant, you've got a small team, you kind of feel like you don't really have a choice. You have what you have, you need to be there every week, so you have to offer that every week.
Yeah.
Rather than coming up with a way to rotate volunteers in and out, or wait until you can recruit more volunteers before you offer that to your church.
Yeah.
So one thing that I talked to a church leader recently, and this is something that I thought was really compelling, because this is a guy who, through years of doing it wrong, learned how to do it right.
Yeah. And
what he did at his church is he promised all of his volunteers that they would never serve more than every other week, with the goal of having a team be big enough that they would only have to serve once a month.
Yeah.
And then also, they would wait to launch something until they had the volunteer base to support it.
Okay.
And they would never make a volunteer fill more than like 1 or 2 roles at a time in the first place. So truly, whenever he was vision casting and he saw a need in the community and he wanted his church to fill that need, he would then turn and recruit more people to join the volunteer team, rather than turn to the current volunteer team and ask them to carry the load.
Yeah.
So that helped them avoid burdening their volunteers with more and more and more until they just crash.
Yes.
Which I see at churches a lot.
And you are, I think you would agree that you're like a yes man, and like you want to do everything you
can. I'm a people pleaser. I can't help it.
I'm a people. That's what I mean. Not a yes man, but a people pleaser, and I'm that way as well. And a lot of volunteers that God has brought in my direction to serve on my worship team were people pleasers as well.
Yes.
They're just amazing people that were always just like, Wes, I want to serve next week. I want to serve the week after. Hey, don't worry about scheduling me too much. I'm fine.
Yeah.
And I would constantly communicate with them and be like, hey man, you served now for like 2 months in a row every single week. Why don't you take a week off? No, I'm fine. And come to find out, those people would burn themselves out. It wasn't me burning them out.
Yeah.
It was them burning themselves out.
I've done it to myself, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, it's not hard to do. I mean, because it's in our nature. We want to serve in so many ways, but we often go beyond capacity, and we don't realize it until it's too late, and then we burned ourselves out, and at that point, we're no good for anyone, and we have to take that time to recharge and rest. Yeah.
It's always better to have breaks built into your process. It's a mistake to put it on our volunteers to tell us no.
Yes, and one thing I've learned now that I am no longer in the role of scheduling the people and I'm just now a part of the team as a volunteer, I've really appreciated my worship leader, how he purposely does not let me serve more than a certain amount. Even if I were to go to him and text and be like, I'm good. He's like, no man, you're gonna serve just twice this month. And part of that is because we have a decent amount of volunteers, but the other part is he knows, because he's made that mistake as well and has learned from that mistake. And if that's anything I can impress upon anybody in terms of burnout, it's that one of the easiest ways to avoid having your volunteers burn out is to not continue to schedule them. Even when they say, please schedule me next week, please schedule me. Like, no, you are only going to serve this number of times a month or this number of times a quarter, because I know what will happen if I continue to schedule you above and beyond there.
Yeah, because we've all been there. Even as church leaders, we probably felt burned out and like we don't have anything left in the tank.
Yes.
So as long as we can remember what that feels like and know that our volunteers will sometimes feel that way, it'll motivate us to build in those processes to help prevent burnout.
Yes. You had neglecting conflict resolution. Don't neglect conflict resolution. What do you mean by that, Matt? Dive into that.
If a couple of volunteers are just butting heads against each other, they're not working well together, and there's some sort of conflict or division between 2 or more of your volunteers, you have to resolve that as fast as possible. Because anything like that at your church will be a cancer that metastasizes and festers and becomes a real issue across the entire leadership of your church. At the very best, avoiding it just causes 1 or more volunteers to leave. And that's best case scenario, which is something you still don't want. Worst case scenario, like your entire leadership team is at like a DEFCON 1, everything's falling apart situation, and you don't want that for your church. So anytime any volunteers are struggling, especially if they're on the same team, like if they're on the same team, then obviously this isn't a good fit. You need to find some other place for them so that they're not having to work together. But if there's any conflict, sit them down, talk to them one-on-one, together, whatever approach is necessary in that scenario. Do that so that the conflict won't grow into an actual problem for your church.
Yeah, it's good stuff, man. Now, you have so the do's and don'ts. And one of the do's here, now that we've kind of just beat me down with all the don'ts and everything I did terribly.
I'm sorry.
So we mentioned earlier about how we found the formula.
Yes, the formula.
So I actually spent time, I'm a nerd in case you haven't figured this out yet, but I actually have been wondering for a long time, what is that ideal amount of time you schedule out someone?
Yes.
And I did a lot of research, and by research I mean I went on every Facebook group I could think of, from Worship Leader Collective to church communications and everything else in between, church administrators, and I would search just like volunteer scheduling and just identify what people are saying about this. And what I found from looking at all the responses and what works for churches of all sizes, all types, is that 4 to 6 weeks was the sweet spot of how far out to schedule your volunteers. Now here's why. 4 to 6 weeks gives you enough time to have at least a month planned out. So that way every single month is planned out accordingly. You know who's going to show up. You don't necessarily have to schedule all of your songs and all the things, or if in your children's ministry, you don't necessarily have to schedule who is going to be in what room. You just need to know that they're going to serve on that day, scheduling wise. And 4 to 6 weeks gives you the ability to also work new people in to your scheduling regimen. Because one thing that can happen, and I never really thought about this because I was the guy that was scheduling people at most 2 weeks out, because that's how bad I was. I still can't believe the Lord put me in a position of a worship leader during that time period of my life. I had so much growing to do, and it took me a long time to finally get there. But whenever we schedule people too far out, what happens is we can't work them in to our scheduling. And so I've talked to church leaders that have told me, oh yeah, I schedule all my people 3 months out. And I've asked them, well, what do you do with new people that want to jump in and start serving, or be a part of your hospitality team, or be a part of your children's ministry or worship team? And they're like, well, they have to wait for the schedule to come around. I'm like, 3 months is a long time to put someone in a position to get them plugged in and start training them and all that.
Their excitement and momentum is deflated.
Yes, it's big time.
Unless your training and onboarding process is 3 months long, it doesn't make sense.
It's a lot, but 3 months I would say would be a good goal to have internally. So for just you as someone who is scheduling people, say, you know what, I'm going to schedule my people and send out my requests with whatever software you use. Hopefully it's ChurchTrac. But you send out your requests a month out or so, 4 to 6 weeks. But maybe in the back of your mind somewhere else, you have already actually got your schedule for your people set out 2 months or 3 months. And you don't send out those requests yet, those invites, but you got them there and you're ready.
Right. They're loaded in the barrel.
Yeah, they're locked and loaded. And plus the other thing too is, just on a side note, a lot of times people don't know what they're going to be doing in 6 to 8 weeks anyways.
Yeah.
And so
I can't commit 3 months out to anything.
No, because you're like, you know what? We want to go on a beach vacation in 4 weeks or something.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know if I'm going to be feeling burned out by then. I need to prepare for that. But 4 to 6 weeks is the sweet spot because it's close enough in time to the actual event that they can commit to it and remember.
Yep.
But also not so close that it's too late and they've already made plans and you miss out on them joining. But it's not so far out that they either can't commit because they don't have no idea what they're doing months from now, or it's so far out that they commit and then they just forget.
Yeah. And you have so many other dues. We just don't have time to cover them. You talk about training and show appreciation, which, golly, it took me years to figure that one out. But I think your last point, this is a good one to end with. You say grow their faith to build a volunteer culture.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So doing all 6 of the dues, or all of the other 6 of the dues of volunteer scheduling that I list in this article will go a long way to help building a volunteer culture, like showing appreciation. If you celebrate your volunteers, especially publicly from the pulpit, that's probably your best like recruiting effort for new volunteers, because everybody's going to want to join that party.
Yeah. But
investing in their faith is crucial, because here's the thing about church growth and church planting that I see. This is just from my perspective, so take this with a grain of salt. But I see a lot of material about church growth and church planting that focuses on like leadership dynamics, and also just metrics and just methods and how to increase the number of people at your church and the number of people on your team, and lead them in a way that they want to stay on board. And that's great.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult like gear shift into thinking of every dynamic and every aspect of church as an opportunity for discipleship.
Yes.
Even managing volunteers. You have to invest in the faith journey of your volunteers. It's the best way to recruit and retain volunteers, is investing in their faith.
Yeah.
So that they then turn around and reciprocate that investment by pouring themselves out into the people that they're serving.
And when I look back to how I managed my team and how I just kind of poured into my team, I feel like if we're focused solely on the discipleship of our team and how we can just continue to bring them along with us in our journey towards seeking after Christ and what He wants in our lives, and seeking Him through His Word and through the service, all these other things I think naturally culminate from it. And so if I'm constantly just discipling my people, I'm going to have clear communication. I'm going to have flexibility with them. I'm going to know what it is that really makes them tick. I'm going to show appreciation. And so that's the key of church volunteering, scheduling, and all of that is just discipling, and then everything else will follow.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like below and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on all the future videos that we put out. Also, if you're managing volunteers at your church and you would like a tool to help make that process easier for you, and a tool that doesn't break the bank, be sure to go to ChurchTrac.com and start your free trial.